Under the fractured moon, a single flake of snow traced the scar of a forgotten howl, whispering of powers that slumbered in the bones of the unworthy. Alara's breath fogged the air like a ghost fleeing her lips, each exhale a fragile rebellion against the biting wind that clawed at the jagged peaks of the Frostfang Mountains. The world around her was a canvas of unrelenting white, where the snowdrifts rose like ancient barrows, swallowing the echoes of her footsteps. She had been cast out from the heart of the pack's domain, the wolf school's towering spires of ice-carved stone, now a distant silhouette against the bruised horizon. Rejection hung on her like the tattered cloak she clutched to her chest, a threadbare remnant of the life she once dreamed of claiming. The collar de sangue, as the elders called it in hushed tones, rested heavy against her throat. It was no ornament of silver or gold, but a crude twist of leather stained with the dark, crusted remnants of her own failed attempts. During the shifting trials, when the moon hung full and demanding, she had pricked her palm with a ritual thorn, letting the blood drip onto the earth in supplication to the goddess. But her blood had never called forth the wolf within. It had only seeped into the frozen ground, unheeded, marking her as broken. The other Omegas, their forms rippling seamlessly into sleek pelts of gray and silver, had loped away with triumphant howls, leaving her to the scorn of the Alphas who oversaw the rites. "You are no shifter," the headmaster had growled, his voice like grinding ice as he tore the ceremonial band from her wrist. "The goddess turns her face from you. Exile is your mercy, linger here, and the pack's purity demands your end." His eyes, cold as the steel of his claw-tipped gauntlets, had held no pity, only the rigid duty of tradition. Alara had felt the weight of those words settle into her chest, heavier than the blizzards that now battered her path. She was 18 winters old, marked by failure, her body a vessel that betrayed her at every turn. No heat had ever stirred her veins to summon the beast. No instinct had guided her through the moonlit dances that bound the pack in unity. She was Omega in name only, a shadow among wolves. The wind howled through the narrow pass, carrying the faint, mournful weavos from the valley below. The pack's evening chorus, a symphony she was forever barred from joining. Alara stumbled onward, her boots sinking into the powder with each laborious step. The cold seeped through her gloves, numbing her fingers until they ached like the phantom pains of a shift that never came. Hunger gnawed at her belly, a dull fire that paled against the deeper burn of shame. She had always been the quiet one in the school's echoing halls, her dark hair braided with simple cords, her eyes the color of storm-tossed seas, eyes that searched the stars for answers the elders could not provide. In her mind, the memories replayed like a relentless fever dream, the training grounds, vast and ringed by torches that sputtered against the eternal dusk. She had stood at the circle's edge, heart pounding in rhythm with the distant thunder of shifting bodies colliding in mock hunts. "Focus on the moon's pull," the instructors would intone, their voices weaving through the chants. But for Alara, the pull was a void, a chasm where others felt the surge of primal power. Her attempts had ended in collapse, sweat-soaked and trembling, her skin unmarked by the silver fur that crowned the successful. Whispers followed her. Cursed blood, deformed spirit. The colla de sangue had been her final offering, tied by her own trembling hands after the last trial, its leather warmed by the heat of her desperation. Now it chafed against her wind-burned skin, a constant reminder that her essence was tainted, unworthy of the wild heart that beat in every true wolf. As night deepened, the moon climbed higher, its light fracturing across the snowfields in shards of pale silver. Alara crested a ridge and paused, gasping, her legs burning from the ascent. Below stretched the forbidden expanse, a labyrinth of crevasses and wind-sculpted spires where outcasts were said to wander until the goddess claimed them, or until the feral beasts did. Legends spoke of ancient curses here, of alphas who had fallen from grace and become shadows, their howls twisted into warnings. She pressed a hand to the collar, feeling the dried blood flake beneath her touch, and wondered if this was her destiny, to dissolve into the white void, forgotten like the flakes that melted on her tongue. A distant crack echoed through the peaks, not thunder, but something sharper, like bone snapping under pressure. Elara froze, her pulse quickening. The wind carried a new scent on its wings, blood, fresh and metallic, mingled with the musky tang of exertion. Her instincts, dull as they were, prickled at the base of her skull. She was alone, but not entirely. Something prowled the edges of her solitude, drawn perhaps by the same inexorable pull that had exiled her. In that moment, as the moon bathed her in its indifferent glow, Elara felt the first stirrings of defiance amid the despair. The collar de sangue warmed against her skin, as if the goddess's breath had brushed it. She was broken, yes, but the mountains did not yield to the weak. They forged them anew, or claimed them utterly. With a shuddering breath, she descended into the expanse, the snow swallowing her trail like a secret she was not yet ready to confess. The night deepened, and with it, the promise of trials yet unseen, whispers of power that slumbered, waiting for the fracture that would set them free. The scent of blood thickened the air like a veil drawn across the moon's face, pulling Elara deeper into the forbidden expanse. Her boots crunched over brittle ice, each step a hesitant pulse against the silence that had swallowed the distant crack. The wind whispered secrets through the spires of frozen rock, carrying fragments of a howl, not the triumphant chorus of her former pack, but something fractured, raw, laced with pain. She should have turned back, sought shelter in some shallow crevice where the blizzards could not reach her dreams. But curiosity, that treacherous spark in her chest, urged her forward, mingling with the fear that coiled in her gut like a serpent denying its own fangs. The collar de sangue pulsed warmer now, its leather edge pressing into her collarbone as if alive, tasting the metallic tang on the breeze. Elara's breath came in shallow bursts, fogging her vision, and she wiped her eyes with a numb hand. The expanse unfolded before her in deceptive calm. Vast plains of snow, unbroken save for the jagged shadows of crevasses, where the earth had split like wounded flesh under the goddess's indifferent gaze. Legends of this place haunted the wolf school's fireside tales. Alphas, who had defied the pack's laws, cursed to wander as half-beasts, their forms twisted between man and shadow. She had always dismissed them as warnings for the unruly, but now, alone, the stories clawed at her resolve. A low groan shattered the quiet, emanating from a cluster of wind-hollowed boulders ahead. Elara froze, her heart slamming against her ribs like a trapped bird. Instinct, dull, unreliable, flared in her veins, not the wild surge of a shifter, but a primal caution that rooted her to the spot. She edged closer, her fingers brushing the rough stone for balance, the cold seeping through her gloves like regret. There, slumped against a frost-rimed outcrop, was a figure that stole the breath from her lungs. He was no feral outcast. His form spoke of royalty fallen into ruin, broad shoulders clad in a cloak of dark fur matted with crimson streaks, his armored chest heaving with labored breaths. Silver threads wove through his midnight hair, and a circlet of ancient iron, dented and bloodied, rested askew on his brow, the mark of an alpha king, whispered in the school's forbidden scrolls. His eyes snapped open as she approached, twin flames of amber piercing the gloom, locking onto hers with an intensity that felt like a physical blow. Pain etched his features, sharp as the crevasse winds. A gash across his thigh wept freely, soaking the snow in dark blooms, and his right arm hung limp, twisted at an unnatural angle. Yet even wounded, he exuded the aura of command, his presence a gravitational pull that made the air hum. Elara's instincts recoiled. Alphas like him were the architects of her exile, enforcers of the purity that had branded her unworthy. Fear surged, hot and electric, urging her to flee. But curiosity held her fast, a thread of something unspoken weaving between them. Who dares trespass the expanse? His voice rumbled like thunder trapped in stone, laced with exhaustion but unyielding, each word a command forged in fire. He shifted, wincing as blood seeped anew, his gaze never leaving her face. Up close, she saw the weight of his breaking. Scars like silver rivers across his jaw, eyes shadowed by ghosts that no exile could match. This was no mere warrior. Guilt clung to him like the snow to his cloak, a king's burden etched in every labored breath. Alara's throat tightened, words failing her as the color de sangre burned against her skin, as if recognizing kin in his wounds. I'm no trespasser, she managed, her voice a fragile thread in the wind. Exiled, like you perhaps. The pack cast me out for failing the shifts. The blood. She touched the collar instinctively, flakes of dried crimson crumbling under her fingers. His eyes flicked to it, narrowing, a flicker of recognition, or was it pity, crossing his features. Exiled, he echoed, the word tasting of ash. His name was Thorn, king of the Frostfang realms, though he offered it not. She sensed it in the way the moon seemed to bow lower, illuminating the ancient tattoo on his wrist. A snarling wolf encircled by thorns, symbol of a throne stained by betrayal. He had fled his own court, hunted by rivals who whispered of his weakness, his failure to sire an heir after a curse from a spurned seer. Guilt was his shadow, the mate he had rejected for duty's sake, the pack wars he had waged in the name of honor, only to watch blood soak the snow in vain. Now, the wound in his thigh was no accident, a poisoned arrow from assassins, slowing him to this vulnerable halt. The connection stirred unbidden, instinctive as the moon's tide. Ilara felt it in the way her pulse synced with his ragged breaths, a curiosity born of shared fracture that she denied with every fiber of her being. He was everything she feared, power incarnate, a king who embodied the hierarchies that had shattered her. Yet fear twisted into something softer, a morbid draw to his melancholy, as if the goddess had woven their exiles into the same thread. "Leave me," he growled, but his eyes betrayed him, searching her face for the mercy he could not grant himself. "The hunters will come. You carry no wolf strength." She hesitated, the wind howling its protest, carrying the faint echo of pursuing paws. The collar de sangre warmed further, a silent promise amid the denial. In that suspended moment, under the fractured moon, Alara glimpsed the wound every Alpha King bore, and wondered if her brokenness could touch it without shattering them both. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The wind clawed at the narrow crevice like a beast denied its prey, forcing Alara and Thorn deeper into the labyrinth of ice that scarred the forbidden expanse. She supported his weight as best she could, her slender frame buckling under the strain of his armored bulk, each step a symphony of grunts and sliding boots on treacherous frost. The collar de sangre thrummed against her skin, its warmth a defiant ember in the encroaching cold, as if the dried crimson within it sensed the fresh spill from his thigh. Blood, hers long congealed, his still pulsing, bound them in this frantic retreat, a scarlet thread weaving through the white desolation. Thorn's breath rasped hot against her ear, his good arm clamped around her shoulders like an iron vice, not for comfort, but necessity. "This way," he murmured, voice gravel rough from pain, guiding her toward a shadowed overhang where the rock face curved inward, forming a shallow cave veiled by dangling icicles like frozen fangs. The moon's light fractured through them, casting prismatic shards across his pale face, illuminating the deep lines of guilt that furrowed his brow. He was no stranger to wounds. The scars on his arms told tales of battles won and lost. But this one, the poisoned arrow's bite, carried the sting of betrayal. His rivals in the Frostfang court, scheming betas hungry for the throne, had struck under the cover of a false truce, their arrows tipped with nightshade venom that burned slower than any blade. Alara's muscles screamed in protest as she eased him down against the cave's rear wall, the stone unyielding and slick with meltwater. She tore a strip from her tattered cloak, pressing it to his thigh, where the gash wept relentlessly, the metallic scent blooming thick in the confined space. Her hands trembled, not from cold alone, but from the intimacy of it, the way his amber eyes watched her, unblinking, as if she were a puzzle etched by the goddess herself. Fear still lingered in her chest, a coiled shadow reminding her of the alphas who had exiled her, their judgments as sharp as this king's gaze. Yet here she was, tending to one, her fingers slick with his essence, mirroring the collar that marked her own failure. The venom, it spreads like frost fire, Thorn said, his words measured, each one costing him. He winced as she tightened the makeshift bandage, but made no move to pull away. Outside, the wind carried the first unmistakable howls. Low, probing, the pack of assassins closing in, their forms spectral against the snowfields. They were no wild ferals, but trained hunters from his own realm, cloaked in white furs that blended with the blizzard, their loyalty bought with promises of power. Thorn's fall from grace had made him prey, the king who had rejected his fated mate for the sake of alliances, who had led wars that left packs shattered under blood-soaked moons, now fled like a common rogue. Alara glanced toward the cave's mouth, where the storm raged fiercer, whipping snow into a blinding curtain. "They'll track your blood," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the gale. Panic clawed at her throat, visions of the Wolf School's trials flashing unbidden, her body collapsing in the circle, the Alpha's scornful howls echoing as they declared her blood impure. She had no claws, no fangs to summon, only this fragile humanity that the pack despised. But as the distant baying grew insistent, a spark ignited within her, born of the same desperation that had driven her into exile. She could flee now, leave this broken king to his fate, and vanish into the expanse's maw. Freedom whispered of solitude, of no more judgments, no more failures. Yet the collar burned hotter, its leather pulsing like a second heart, urging her to stay. With a resolve that surprised even her, Alara scrambled to the cave's edge, gathering armfuls of brittle scrub from the crevices, twisted roots exposed by the wind's erosion. Her fingers, numb and raw, struck flint against steel from Thorn's discarded pouch, sparks flying like defiant stars until a small fire caught, its flames licking hungrily at the fuel. The warmth pushed back the chill, casting flickering shadows that danced across the walls like ancestral spirits. She dragged a flat stone closer, heating it in the blaze before pressing it, hissing and makeshift, to cauterize the edges of his wound. Thorn's roar shook the cave, a guttural sound that blended pain and gratitude, his hand gripping hers in the aftermath, calloused and steady despite the agony. "You risk everything for a stranger," he said softly, as the fire's glow softened the hard planes of his face. The howls outside circled closer, then veered, confused by the storm's fury and the false trails Alara had hastily scattered. Handfuls of snow mixed with flakes from the collar, her own tainted blood mingling with his to muddy the scent. Empathy bloomed in that shared silence, fragile as the ice beyond their refuge. She saw in him not the untouchable king of legends, but a man haunted by choices. The mate he had cast aside to forge peace, only for war to claim her life. The duties that had hollowed his soul, leaving guilt as his constant companion. And in her, he glimpsed a quiet strength, the Omega who had endured rejection without bitterness, her spirit unbroken where his throne had cracked. The bond stirred subtly, not in grand declarations, but in the brush of his fingers against hers as she adjusted the fire, in the way her pulse steadied to match the rhythm of his breathing. It was resisted, rationalized as mere survival's pact, two exiles against the night. Yet beneath it, Curiosity deepened into understanding. The collar de sangue, a bridge between their wounds. As the assassin's howls faded into the wind's lament, Ilara met his gaze, the flames reflecting in her storm-sea eyes. What was strength, if not choosing to heal amid the hunt? The cave held them in its icy embrace, a temporary sanctuary where fear yielded to the first threads of trust, and the moon outside watched, patient, as destinies intertwined in the glow of shared fire. In the heart of that fragile peace, Ilara wondered if redemption could flicker like this flame, small, defiant, born from the blood they both bore. The moon hung like a fractured chalice over the cave's jagged mouth, spilling silver light that pooled at Ilara's feet, turning the snow-dusted floor into a mosaic of forgotten oaths. She sat cross-legged by the dying fire, its embers pulsing like the collar de sangue against her throat, a rhythm that echoed the faint throb in Thorn's bandaged thigh. The night had deepened into that velvet hush where the world held its breath. The assassin's howls long faded into the wind's mournful dirge. Yet peace was a fragile illusion here in the forbidden expanse, where shadows clung to the walls like unspoken regrets, and the air tasted of iron and frost. Ilara's fingers traced the collar's edge absent-mindedly, the leather worn smooth from nights of desperate prayer, its crusted blood a testament to the goddess's silence. She had always felt it as a curse, this mark of her inadequacy, the way it mocked her during the trials, when her blood spilled without summoning the wolf, leaving her human and exposed amid the pack's triumphant snarls. But now, in this stolen sanctuary, with Thorn's steady gaze upon her, it stirred something deeper, a warmth that seeped into her veins like moonlight through cracks in ice. He watched her from across the flames, his amber eyes softened by exhaustion, the iron circlet on his brow catching glints of firelight like stars trapped in thorns. "You carry it like a crown of thorns," he said at last, his voice a low rumble that stirred the embers, sending sparks dancing upward. He shifted slightly, wincing as the cauterized wound pulled, but his focus remained on her, piercing as a blade forged in the heart of winter. Guilt shadowed his features, etched deeper than the scars that mapped his skin. Remnants of battles where he had chosen duty over mercy, alliances over the fated bond that might have saved his realm from the fractures now hunting him. The collar de sangue. In my court, such a thing is whispered of only in curses. Blood offered, but unclaimed. What failure birthed it in you? Ilara's breath caught, the question slicing through the quiet like a crevasse, widening under pressure. She had never spoken of it aloud, not even to the indifferent stars above the Wolf School's training grounds. The memories flooded her. The circle of packed snow, torches flaring against the eternal dusk, the other Omega's bodies convulsing into fluid grace while hers remained stubbornly mortal, sweat-slick and trembling. "The shifts," she murmured, her voice threading through the crackle of the fire. "I failed them all. Pricked my palm under the full moon, let the blood fall as offering. But the goddess." She turned away. "They called me empty, a vessel cracked before the forge, exiled me to wander until the cold claims what the pack could not." Thorn's expression darkened, not with pity, but a recognition that mirrored the melancholy in his own soul. He had rejected his mate for the throne's demands, watching her fade into the snows of despair, her death a stain on his crown that no victory could wash clean. "The goddess does not turn away lightly," he replied, his words measured, laced with the weight of a king who had questioned the divine more than once. "Perhaps your blood waits for the right moon, or the right wound to awaken it." He extended his uninjured hand, palm upturned, revealing the ancient tattoo, a wolf entwined in thorns, pulsing faintly as if alive under the moon's gaze. "Mine bears thorns for the choices that bleed me still. Yours. It calls to something buried." The collar warmed then, insistent, as if his words had coaxed a hidden ember to life. Ilara felt it first in her fingertips, a tingling heat that spread like frostfire through her limbs, chasing away the numbness of exile. The cave seemed to narrow, the air thickening with an electric hum, the fire's glow intensifying until shadows fled to the corners. Outside, the wind rose in a sudden wail, whipping snow against the icicles with a ferocity that shook the stone. Thorn tensed, his senses sharpening despite the venom's lingering haze, but Alara's world tilted inward, her vision blurring at the edges as the caller's blood, dried, dormant, stirred beneath her touch. It began as a whisper in her blood, a pull deeper than instinct, drawing from the core of her being where the wolf had always slumbered, chained by doubt. Her heart pounded, sinking with the distant huevos that now echoed not from hunters, but from the expanse itself, a chorus rising like a revelation under the moon's fractured light. The collar de sangue burned, not with pain, but awakening. Flakes of crimson softened, seeping warmth into her skin, mingling with the pulse of Thorn's nearby wound. Visions flashed unbidden, the training grounds of the wolf school, not as she remembered them in failure, but alive with potential, the earth trembling under a power she had never unleashed. Ilara gasped, her body arching as the surge crested, a visceral wave that tore a cry from her throat, raw and primal. Fur rippled across her arms, not the silver pelt of her peers, but something wilder, shadowed with the storm's fury, her eyes flashing amber like Thorn's own. Yet it was no mere shift, it was a cataclysm contained, the cave walls groaning as cracks spiderwebbed through the ice, the fire flaring into a pillar of blue flame that licked the ceiling without consuming. She felt it all, the moon's full embrace, the blood's ancient call, her essence unbound, not as a wolf, but as a force that could shatter stone and summon tempests. The collar glowed faintly, its leather unmarred, as if the goddess had finally claimed the offering, transforming failure into a key forged in hidden fire. Thorn recoiled at first, his instincts flaring to defend against the unknown, but recognition dawned in his eyes, a profound, dawning light that chased the guilt from his features for the first time. He reached for her, his hand steadying her trembling form as the surge ebbed, leaving her human once more, but forever changed. "Pathfinder," he breathed, the word a sacred invocation from the old lore, spoken of Omegas whose blood unlocked destinies, not through fang and claw, but through the unraveling of curses and thrones. His tattoo pulsed in response, the thorns seeming to wilt under her gaze. "You are the key, the one the seer's curse foretold. My realm fractures without you. Your blood mends what mine has broken." Alara collapsed against him, the weight of revelation crashing like an avalanche, her mind reeling from the power's echo. Fear twisted with awe. This gift, long denied, was no gentle bloom, but a storm that could destroy as easily as redeem. The collar de sangue rested cool now, a symbol reborn, binding her not to exile, but to a fate entwined with his. Outside, the wind howled its approval, the moon bearing witness as Thorn's hand lingered on her shoulder, the first true touch of alliance. What was destiny, if not the awakening of wounds into weapons? In that moment, amid the cave's trembling hush, Alara glimpsed the ethical precipice ahead, to wield this power for his redemption, or to claim her freedom in the wilds, leaving the king to his thorns. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your worth. The dawn bled crimson across the Frostfang peaks, staining the snow like the first accusation of war, as Alara and Thorn emerged from the cave's shadowed womb. The air hung heavy with the scent of pine resin and distant smoke. The wind's howl softened to a restless murmur that carried whispers of pursuit. Alara's steps faltered on the uneven crust, her body still humming from the revelation's aftershocks. The collar de sangue now a steady pulse against her throat, no longer a mark of failure, but a conduit of storm-wrought power. It felt alive, its leather infused with the night's awakening, drawing her gaze to the horizon where the wolf school's spires pierced the bruised sky like jagged teeth. Thorn walked beside her, his limp masked by sheer will, the iron circlet on his brow a crown of thorns that caught the weak light, illuminating the resolve hardening his features. They had spoken little in the hours after her shift, words too frail for the chasm that had opened between them. He had seen her truth, the Pathfinder, the Omega, whose blood could unravel curses, mend fractured pacts, and topple thrones built on betrayal. Yet in his amber eyes, Ilara glimpsed the weight of expectation, a king's plea veiled as duty. Freedom tugged at her like the wind's cold fingers. The expanse stretched endlessly, offering solitude where no judgments could chain her. But the Kohler warmed with every glance at Thorn, binding her to the ethical forge ahead, to heal his wounds or let them fester, to forgive the hierarchies that had scarred her or ignite them in righteous fury. The confrontation came not as a whisper, but a thunderclap of howls that shattered the morning's fragile truce. From the ridge above, shadows detached from the tree line. A hunting party, not Thorn's assassins, but emissaries from her old pack, their white-furred forms rippling with the grace she had envied. At their head loped Kale, the alpha rival who had risen in the wolf school's ranks during her trials, his pelt a sleek obsidian that gleamed under the climbing sun. Betrayal clung to him like frost. He had been the one to whisper of her tainted blood to the elders, his ambition fueled by a desire to claim the school's mastery, and rumor held Thorn's vacant throne through shadowy alliances. Now his eyes, cold steel, locked on Ilara, widening in shock as recognition dawned. "Traitors spawn!" Kale snarled, shifting seamlessly to his human form, his voice echoing off the ice like cracking stone. He stood tall, clad in armored leathers etched with the pack's lunar sigils, a fresh scar across his cheek, speaking of recent skirmishes. Flanking him were betas from the school, their faces twisted in the same scorn that had exiled her, but now laced with wariness. "You dare return? The goddess condemned you, your blood unfit, your spirit weak. And now you consort with the fallen king? His curse taints these lands. We've come to end it." Thorn stepped forward, his injured arm braced against a boulder, the tattoo on his wrist flaring as if the thorns sought blood. Guilt flickered in his gaze, not for himself, but for drawing her into this storm, the very hierarchies he had upheld as king, now turning fangs on the one who could redeem him. "Kale," he rumbled, authority threading his pain-laced words, "your ambition blinds you. The seer's curse was mine to bear, born of choices I cannot unmake. But she," his eyes met Ilara's, a silent entreaty, "is no spawn of weakness. She is the Pathfinder, key to mending what war has torn." Laughter barked from Kale, sharp as shattering ice, but his posture tensed, claws extending instinctively. The betas shifted uneasily, their howls rising in a discordant chorus that stirred the snow into swirling eddies. Ilara felt the collar de sangue ignite, its warmth surging like a river of fire through her veins, awakening the power that had slumbered too long. Visions assailed her, the training grounds in flames, not from failure, but from the cataclysm she could unleash, earth-splitting, winds howling tempests that would bury the school's spires under avalanches of retribution. Freedom beckoned in that surge, the chance to shatter the pack's purity, to forgive nothing and walk away whole, unburdened by a king's thorns. Yet as Kale lunged, his form blurring into wolfish fury, claws raking the air toward Thorn's throat, Ilara's choice crystallized in the heat of battle. She raised her hand, the color pulsing in rhythm with her heart, and the air thickened, crackling with unseen force. A gust erupted from the ridge, not mere wind, but a vortex born of her will, snow and ice whipping into a blinding maelstrom that hurled Kyle back, his betas scattering like leaves in a gale. The alpha rose snarling, blood trickling from his maw where frost had scored his hide, but Ilara advanced, her storm-sea eyes glowing with ethereal light. "You judged me broken," she whispered, voice carrying like thunder over the din. "But your strength is chains. What is power, if not choosing mercy over the blade?" Thorn joined her, his presence a steady anchor amid the chaos, fending off a beta with a swift, pained strike from his good arm. The fight blurred into visceral poetry. Blood sprayed across the snow in crimson arcs, mingling with the collar's ancient stain. Howls pierced the wind like lamentations. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows that danced like warring spirits. Kale circled, feinting and striking, his betrayal laid bare in every lunge, the letters he had forged to Thorn's court, promising loyalty while plotting the king's downfall for a share of the realm. Elara parried with bursts of summoned gale, her power raw and unrefined, tearing gashes in the earth that swallowed paws and forced retreats. In the melee's heart, as Kale pinned Thorn against a crevasse's edge, his jaws snapping inches from the king's throat, Elara faced the precipice. War would claim them all, packs clashing in endless snow, her gift twisted into vengeance that mirrored the very rejection she despised. Forgiveness, though, was a blade turned inward, to spare Kale, to reveal her power not as destruction, but as the bridge to Thorn's redemption, binding her freedom to his healing. The choler burned hottest then, a spiritual demand as she channeled the surge, not to shatter, but to bind. Vines of ice erupted from the ground, coiling around Kale's limbs, not to crush, but to hold, forcing him still in a cage of her making. "Enough," she commanded, her voice a revelation under the moon's lingering echo. Kale thrashed, eyes wild with fury and dawning fear, but the betas halted, sensing the shift in the winds. Thorn rose, bloodied but unbroken, his hand finding hers in the settling snow, a touch that spoke of alliance forged in ethical fire. Freedom slipped further away, rationalized as the greater liberty of choice, to love amid the ruins, to redeem where others would raise. Yet doubt lingered, a shadow in her chest. Was this mercy true strength, or surrender to the throne's pull? As Kale's howls faded into defeated snarls, the pack retreating into the mist-shrouded valleys, Elara stood amid the bloodied drifts, the collar de sangue cooling like a vow sealed. The confrontation had judged them both, King and Omega, guilt and grace intertwined. But the true trial loomed in the Renacimento ahead, where sacrifice would demand its price, and the moon would weigh their souls against the stars. The sun dipped toward the jagged horizon, painting the frost-fang peaks in strokes of molten gold and shadowed crimson, as if the goddess herself wept blood over the scarred earth. Elara stood amid the settling drifts, her breath ragged plumes in the chill air, the collar de sangue, a steady thrum against her pulse, a rhythm that had shifted from lament to anthem in the span of a single dawn. Kyle's defeated form receded into the mist with his betas, their howls fracturing into echoes of doubt, leaving the ridge silent save for the wind's soft requiem. Thorn's hand lingered in hers, warm despite the cold, his touch a bridge across the chasm of their shared fractures. Yet as the adrenaline ebbed, the weight of choice settled like fresh snow, heavy and unyielding, pressing against her ribs. She pulled away gently, her storm-sea eyes searching his face, where guilt's shadows warred with a fragile hope. The iron circlet on his brow caught the dying light, thorns glinting like accusations, reminders of the throne he had poisoned with rejection and war. "You spared them," he said, voice low and resonant, carrying the timbre of mountains stirred to life. "Mercy where I would have struck. But at what cost to you, Pathfinder? Your power. It could have razed the school, buried the betrayers under avalanches of retribution. Freedom was yours to claim." Elara's fingers brushed the collar, its leather now supple, infused with the night's awakening, the dried blood within transformed into a vital essence that hummed with lunar fire. She felt it all. The temptation of liberty, wild and untamed, where she could wander the expanse as a force unbound, her gift a solitary storm that answered to no king, no pack. No more exiles, no more trials where her blood had spilled in vain. Yet destiny tugged like invisible thorns, entwining her path with his. The alpha whose melancholy mirrored her own, whose wounds begged for the healing only her touch could provide. Love, she realized, was no swift flame, but a slow forge, resisted in the fear of chains, rationalized as duty's echo, and now accepted as the redemption that bound them, not a reward, but a proof that brokenness could mend what power alone shattered. The wind rose then, carrying the faint, acrid scent of smoke from the valleys below, signals from Thorn's fractured court, where rivals still schemed under false moons. He had confessed it all in the cave's hush, the seer's curse, woven from his rejection of a fated mate to seal fragile alliances, had withered his realm, turning loyalties to venom and heirs to ghosts. His guilt was a crown heavier than iron, etched in every scar, every war that had soaked the snow in futile crimson. I led them to ruin, he admitted, his amber eyes meeting hers without evasion, raw as exposed bone. Duty demanded sacrifice, but it hollowed me. You. Your blood calls the light I lost. Join me, Alara, not as consort, but as equal, the pathfinder who unmakes curses. Her heart clenched, a visceral ache that blended with the cold seeping through her cloak. Compassion warred with the scar of her own rejection. The Wolf School's elders, Kale's whispers, the caller's mocking wait during trials that had left her human and alone. To heal him meant returning to those hierarchies, wielding her gift not for vengeance, but unity, forgiving the structures that had deemed her unworthy. Sacrifice loomed, her freedom for his realm's rebirth, her storm for the quiet mending of thorns. Faith flickered against despair, a lunar glow in the gathering dusk. Was destiny a cage, or the liberty to choose love's labor? As twilight deepened, the moon crested the peaks, full and unfractured, bathing them in silver that turned the bloodied snow to pearl. Alara stepped closer, her hand rising to trace the tattoo on his wrist, where the wolf's form stirred under her touch, thorns uncoiling like vines seeking sun. The collar de sangue flared, a bridge of warmth that surged between them, mingling their essences in a silent vow. Visions cascaded, the training grounds reborn, not destroyed but transformed. Earth yielding to growth, packs uniting under a moon that embraced all blood, pure or tainted. Thorn's realm healed, curses unraveled by her power, his guilt transmuted into grace. Union, not conquest. Cura through shared fire. I choose you, she whispered, the words a renascimento forged in the night's embrace, her voice steady as the moon's pull. Not surrender, but elevation, Omega and King, rejection and redemption intertwined. Thorn's arms encircled her, tentative at first, then fierce, his breath warm against her temple, the scent of pine and blood enveloping her like a manto rasgado made whole. The wind hushed, as if the goddess approved, Weavos distant now, harmonizing in tentative peace. Their lips met under that celestial witness, a kiss born of trials, tender amid the tragedy, visceral as the storm's echo, sealing the ethical pact. Power yielded to compassion, destiny claimed, yet freely given. In that union, Ilara felt the collar de sangue settle, its pulse sinking with his heart, a symbol eternal, binding wounds into wholeness. The peaks stood sentinel, snow whispering of rebirths yet to come, where every alpha's scar found its healer, and every omega's exile bloomed into throne. Strength was mercy chosen, love, the ultimate proof. As they turned toward the valleys, hand in hand, the moon smiled, full and forgiving, on souls remade. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.